Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this ReadyGamingTech.com video we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hope you're all having an amazing day. We have lots of news to get through in this video, but I'd like to start things out with an update to the B550 motherboard situation. If you watched yesterday's news video, you'll know that we finally have an image of a B550 motherboard, which is not the B550A, but regular vanilla plain old B550, which we've been waiting for AMD to release for seemingly ever at this point. But now we actually have further confirmation on the specifications of these boards, thanks to Momomo on Twitter, who discovered an article on HKEPC. I'll link it in the video description, of course. And the B550 chipset is very much like a pared back X570, as you would expect, with the biggest cuts being in I/O. So the graphics support, which of course would be the primary PCIe slot, is generation 4 x 16, and we also have storage support PCIe Gen 4, although we can probably guess there'll be fewer M.2s or what have you on the board. The biggest difference here is that the chipset is only generation 3, and we also see a drastic pareback in terms of the I/O. So, for example, we have fewer super speed USB ports, we have fewer SATA ports, and so on and so on. I know I've said this a couple of times before, but I'm actually kind of frustrated with the B550 situation. I really wish that we'd have seen them launch much earlier, because they would have made a fantastic pairing with processors like the 3600, which instead it's been like, well, if you want to buy a 3600, really you have to go with B450. Not that those are bad boards, there's some really stellar B450 boards out there, but still, it then means, of course, you're essentially locked to generation 3, unless you go with the unsupported BIOS route, and, well, yeah, then, of course, you're using older Agisa code, and yada yada yada. So, I'm kind of disappointed that we've had to wait so long, but obviously, sometimes timings cannot be helped, and I suspect with the recent that's been going around, that probably hasn't helped things much recently either. And now, shifting completely and utterly to a different topic, and this will be Nvidia and their next generation graphics cards. So there have been lots of rumours concerning Ampere, assuming that's even what it's called eventually. For this video I'm going to call it Ampere/RTX 30 series, but of course that's not been confirmed yet in terms of naming. So the first thing I'd like to discuss concerning this is a rumour that it will not be using the TSMC 7nm process. Instead, it will be utilizing Samsung's 10nm. This also has been accompanied with GA102 being taped out, and this is according to Twitter user Kopitai7Kimi. Now, from what I understand, they've had a pretty good track record in the past. The only problem with this information is it does seem at odds with what Nvidia themselves confirmed late last year, with Jensen Huang of Nvidia, who he is the CEO, so I'm assuming he knows what's going on. He stated that TSMC would be handling the majority of the 7nm orders, whereas Samsung would only be getting a small fraction of them. However, to be fair, that is 7nm, so I guess technically speaking it's a different process, which could maybe explain it. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. One is that this rumour is completely and utterly false. We'll get into specs in a moment from someone else. So one is that this rumour is inaccurate. Two, Jensen was kind of skating by actually what they were doing for the gaming cards, and of course that would be his prerogative to not provide all of the information. Or maybe they don't feel that TSMC can provide enough capacity, especially given the next generation consoles are going to start ramping up production soonish, we suspect, and obviously AMD will also be launching Zen 3, and basically they've got a lot of competition. Then again, it's difficult to know for certain. What I will say though is that we actually have Kitty Corgi on Twitter, who also gives a lot of specifications, which we'll get into in a moment, who also says that Samsung are using the 10nm node to manufacture Nvidia's graphics cards. But furthermore, YCry over at videocards.com on their Twitter account has also apparently received information that, yeah, they are going to be using Samsung and their 10nm process for the next generation GeForce cards. So is it true? Well, I would take things with a pinch of salt, but at this point there does seem to be quite a few people who are whispering that Samsung will be the provider of the graphics cards. But let's face it, we don't really care necessarily of the processors being used. We don't really care about what the cards are called. And yeah, what we really care about is what is the specifications of these things. So according to Kitty Corgi, we are looking at a card which will most likely deliver up to around 40% improvement in performance compared to the previous generation. So you can see yourself that GA102, which looks like it's been taped out now, has up to 84 SMs, which is 5,376 CUDA cores. Clock speeds are not listed yet, probably because, to be honest with you, Nvidia are still testing things internally to figure out what they want to run the cards at. But it's configured with a 384-bit bus. Memory clock speeds have also not been stated here. But in addition, we're looking at 12 gigabytes of memory. So most likely it's going to be at least a reasonable increase in memory bandwidth, but we also get 1 whole gigabytes of extra RAM, which is not a whole huge amount, I admit, but it's probably going to be okay for 4K. Oh, also GA102 is going to be the only GPU which supports SLI, apparently. So this information that the next generation is going to be roughly 40% faster, depending obviously on the configuration, and this is probably going to depend a lot on yields and final clock speeds, is not actually in isolation. You can read yourself the specifications for each of the parts here, with GA102 representing the RTX 3080 Ti, and of course it's 40% faster than its predecessor. Each of these figures here are pegged to the RTX 2080 Ti. So GA103 will be the RTX 3080, and you can see the number of SMs/CUDA cores is cut just to 60 SMs, and obviously the memory configuration has seen a snip as well. However, it will still be about 10% faster than the RTX 2080 Ti, which is still pretty damn impressive. GA104, meanwhile, is 95% as fast, so around 5% slower than the RTX 2080 Ti, and it is comprised of just 48 SMs, and we also see the card outfitted with 8 gigabytes of memory as well, and so on down the stack. But just as importantly, RTX is enabled for every single one of these cards. It'll be interesting to see if Nvidia later on down the line does release the GTX, whatever they're going to call it. I assume it's going to be the 17 series, who the heck knows, or instead whether in the future Nvidia are just going to have cards which are capable of ray tracing, and they won't actually launch any like GTX/non-ray tracing GPUs. So whether all of this stuff turns out to be accurate is quite interesting. So according to this information, the cards will launch in the 4th quarter of 2020, which means that they're going to launch in the same window as AMD's high-end cards. And quite frankly, I think this makes a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things, because it really then means that Nvidia can kind of figure out what clock frequencies and pricing and all of the other bits and pieces they need to kind of be at to compete the best they can with AMD. And AMD's roadmap is looking to be extremely aggressive. They've of course now officially confirmed what I leaked, that they're working on RDNA 3, although of course they've provided no information. What we do know is that AMD's cards do have features such as variable rate shading and also ray tracing, although they're being very wishy-washy about, for example, ray tracing. They've just said, yeah, we've got it. But of course, that doesn't really specify performance, it doesn't specify their exact method of implementing ray tracing performance. We've seen the patents, but it's very difficult to infer performance from a patent. What we do know, though, is it does support Tier 1.1, and I do suspect that AMD's cards are going to be pretty impressive. To be fair to Nvidia, Turing was first, including support for things such as variable rate shading and mesh shaders and all of this other stuff. But it looks like AMD are going to be catching up later this year, So it's going to be very interesting to see what Nvidia do next. I think in terms of 50%, I wouldn't be surprised if that figure is actually referring to ray tracing performance for Nvidia, as one thing I consistently hear through the grapevine is that Nvidia are trying to double down on ray tracing performance. Now, given that they were first out of the gate with ray tracing, I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility to drastically increase ray tracing performance. They could do it, honestly, several different ways, including simply increasing the number of RT cores per SM, or alternatively, those RT cores could just be a lot more effective and efficient compared to what we have for the first generation, which would make sense because it's not like, oh, we've designed an RT core, there's absolutely no way we can improve that. Of course, they can improve it, and they can also improve their software implementation as well to become more adapt and more efficient. And we can also infer that there will be additional tensor cores as well available in the GPUs, because that helps with things such as denoising the image. So I'll be very interested to see what happens in graphics over the next year, particularly given the next generation consoles will be on the horizon. And the final topic I'd like to cover today is that E3 2020 is finito. You probably guessed that this would be the ultimate fate of the show for this year, but for the reasons of the cough that's been going around, organisers have felt that it's not in public interest and the health and safety of everyone to let the show go ahead. They are considering some type of online event, but long story short, the show should return next year. This had been rumoured for some time that ultimately they would kind of pull the plug on it, and that they would instead decide to do some type of online event, or maybe it wouldn't go ahead at all. So it's frustrating for us in terms of gamers, but it's also not particularly great for the industry, as I'm sure you can guess. It's not just fun for the developers to kind of, have a few days of talking amongst lots of people, but it's also the time that collaborations can occur, and smaller indie developers can maybe find someone who could help them publish a game, or maybe help them with financial backing, and so on and so on. So hopefully people can get their cash back for hotels or plane flights and that type of thing. But I will add one small extra to this, and that is that allegedly we may be seeing a very interesting conference from Warner Brothers, as there may be a WB Direct incoming, and this will be showing off several very interesting games, including a new Batman title as well as Harry Potter. So I'm really excited, to be honest with you, with a new Batman game. It's been far too long. I really enjoyed Arkham Knight. I know that it kind of had a bit of a mixed reception with some people. I personally don't normally enjoy driving sections, that's a huge amount in games, but for some reason the Batmobile sections in Arkham Knight really appealed to me and I quite enjoyed them. But personally, my favourite game was actually the first one, Arkham Asylum, so I'm very curious to see what the next iteration will bring to the table. With all of that said though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.